rain polished the cemetery until every stone looked newly cut. From beneath the awning, Ruth Vale watched 6 men lower her husband's coffin into the ground. The straps squealed against wet wood. Water ran from the black umbrellas in silver ropes, gathered in the raw earth, and made a shallow brown lake around the grave. The minister kept speaking, but the wind dragged the words away before they reached her. Daniel had always hated rain at funerals. He said it made grief feel staged, as if the sky were being paid to mourn. Ruth had not slept in 4 nights. Each time she closed her eyes, she saw the burned sedan at the bottom of South Quarry Road, its roof crushed, its windows white with heat. The state trooper had warned her not to look at the body. She had looked anyway. There had been almost nothing left that a wife could recognize. The coroner had used dental records. The phrase had become a wall people placed between her and doubt. Dental records, Ruth. There is no mistake. The minister lifted a hand. The rope stopped. That was when Ruth saw the man beyond the cemetery fence. He stood beneath an elm tree with no umbrella, perhaps 40 yards from the grave. A dark overcoat hung from his narrow shoulders. Rain had plastered his hair to his forehead. He kept his head lowered, but not enough to hide his face. Ruth felt the world contract until there was only that face and the rain moving across it. Daniel, not a resemblance, not a grief-born mistake. The man had Daniel's deep-set eyes, Daniel's broken nose, Daniel's left ear bent at the rim from a high school wrestling injury. He even held his right hand inside his coat pocket, the way Daniel had since losing the tip of one finger in a machine press. Her breath locked in her throat. The man looked directly at her. His expression was not pleading or loving. It was terrified. Then he raised one finger to his lips. Ruth pushed past the minister. Someone caught her elbow, but she tore free, her shoes sinking in the mud as she ran between the stones. She heard her sister calling after her. She heard the dull scrape of the coffin descending again. The man turned and walked behind the elm. By the time Ruth reached the fence, no one was there. Beyond the cemetery lay a narrow service road and fields flattened by rain. There was nowhere for him to hide. No car. No footprints in the flooded ditch. Only a black button resting in the grass. Ruth picked it up. She knew the button. She had sewn it onto Daniel's overcoat the winter before. Behind her, the mourners had gone silent. A camera flashed. For 15 years, Ruth told no one what she had seen. She kept the button in a medicine bottle behind the furnace. She kept the funeral photograph in a locked drawer. She kept waking at 3:17 every morning to the sound of someone trying the back door with a key that no longer existed. And every year, on the anniversary of Daniel's death, the telephone rang once. When she answered, a man breathed on the line. The first 14 years, he said nothing. On the 15th, he whispered, "It found my name." Then the line went dead. Chapter 1. The number Evelyn Cross discovered Daniel Vale was alive at 4:42 on a Tuesday afternoon, 8 minutes before she intended to go home. She worked in the special claims unit on the 5th floor of Harrow Mutual, in a windowless room whose fluorescent lights made every human face look posthumous. The department handled fraud that had already learned how to imitate honesty, staged falls, invented fires, arson hidden inside grief, cancer policies, purchased by people who knew more than their doctors. Evelyn's talent was not intuition. She distrusted intuition. Her talent was patience sharpened into suspicion. The Vale file had arrived because a routine audit found a duplicate identity attached to a long-term disability claim in Ohio. The claimant was a warehouse supervisor named Marcus Bell, 51, diabetic, divorced, and unremarkable in every measurable way. His employer had submitted payroll records containing a social security number that belonged to Daniel Aaron Vale, deceased. That alone was not unusual. Numbers were mistyped, stolen, recycled in criminal databases, copied from dead relatives. What made Evelyn stay late was the pattern beneath the error. Daniel Vale's number had been used 27 times since his death. Not continuously, not carelessly. It surfaced every few years, attached to a different person in a different state. A temporary job in Missouri, a bank account in Iowa, a hospital admission in Pennsylvania, a hunting license in West Virginia. Each use lasted weeks or months, then stopped. The people using it had no known connection to one another. Evelyn opened the original death record. Daniel Aaron Vale. Date of death: October 17, 2011. Cause: traumatic injury and thermal damage following vehicle accident. Identification: dental comparison. The policy payout had been modest: $200,000 to his wife, Ruth. The claim had been investigated and closed without objection. Police photographs showed a sedan at the bottom of a quarry embankment, blackened almost to its frame. Evelyn compared the death date with the later uses. A chill moved through her arms. Every one of the 27 transactions had occurred on October 17. She checked twice. Then she exported the dates, stripped the formatting, and checked again. October 17, 2012. Unemployment filing, Missouri. October 17, 2013. Clinic intake, Kentucky. October 17, 2014. Motel employment record, Nebraska. October 17, 2015. Utility application, Ohio. Some years contained several uses, all within the same 24-hour period. By midnight, the identity disappeared again. Evelyn called information security and asked whether the file might have been corrupted. The analyst on duty, a young man named Peters, said, "Corruption doesn't understand anniversaries. Neither does fraud, unless somebody teaches it." He promised a deeper pull by morning. Evelyn printed the claim history. The machine coughed out 34 pages that smelled of hot toner. As she gathered them, she noticed a handwritten note scanned into the original file. It had been made by the adjuster who met Ruth Vale after the funeral. Beneficiary cooperative, but distressed. Asked whether policy can be reversed if insured returns. Explained legal presumption and recovery rights. Beneficiary stated question was hypothetical. Evelyn read the note 3 times. At 5:03, the overhead lights switched to night mode, leaving every third fixture dark. The office became a sequence of pale islands divided by shadow. She searched the archive for photographs from Daniel Vale's funeral. Insurers occasionally documented burial when a body was badly damaged or when identity was disputed. There were 6 images attached to the file, taken by the original adjuster. The first showed the cemetery entrance under rain. The second showed Ruth Vale beside the coffin. The third showed the minister and mourners. The fourth was blurred. The fifth showed the grave from a distance. The sixth would not open. Evelyn clicked it again. The image viewer produced a gray box and an error message. File DAMAGED or unsupported. She downloaded the original and opened it in a forensic preview utility. A narrow strip appeared at the top, then another. The photograph rendered line by line. Rain umbrellas, headstones. At the far edge of the frame, behind a wrought iron fence, stood a man beneath an elm tree. Evelyn enlarged the image. His face was grainy, but visible. He looked toward the grave with one finger raised to his lips. She opened Daniel Vale's driver's license photograph and placed the images side by side. The same broken nose, the same bent left ear, the same deep-set eyes. The office printer started behind her. Evelyn turned so quickly that her chair struck the desk. No one stood near the machine. A single page slid into the output tray. She approached it slowly. It was a copy of the funeral photograph, though she had not selected print. The image was darker than the one on her screen. The mourners were nearly black shapes beneath their umbrellas. The man behind the fence was no longer looking toward the grave. He was looking toward the camera. Across the bottom margin, in faint gray letters, a sentence had appeared. "You should have let me stay dead." Evelyn stared until the printer clicked and went silent. Then her desk phone rang. The display showed no number. She let it ring 4 times before answering. Harrow Mutual Special Claims. Evelyn Cross. For several seconds, she heard only the soft electrical distance of an open line. Then a man said, "Is this the investigator?" "Who is speaking?" The man inhaled shakily. "The dead one." The call ended. Chapter 2. Proof of Life. By Wednesday morning, Evelyn had convinced herself that the printed sentence was an office prank. The alternative was to accept that someone had entered a secure claims floor, manipulated an archived photograph, triggered a network printer, and called her private extension within minutes. A prank was irrational. The alternative was worse. She sealed the page in an evidence sleeve and requested access logs. No unauthorized entry had been recorded. The printer queue showed no job at 5:07. The telephone system showed no incoming call. Peters arrived at 9 carrying coffee, and an expression usually reserved for injured animals. "You're not going to like this," he said. "I rarely like anything introduced that way." He set a laptop beside her keyboard. "The Social Security number is active in systems we don't control. Federal wage reports, state licensing, medical billing, credit headers. It isn't one bad database echoing across the others. Someone has been presenting the number in real life. 27 someones. Maybe, but look at this." He displayed a list of names tied to the number. Marcus Bell, Ellen Price, Warren Cobb, Teresa Knox, Samuel Orman, 23 others. "What do they have in common?" Evelyn asked. "They're dead." She looked at him. "Every person who used Vale's number died within 1 year of using it," Peters continued. "Most within a month, some within days. Causes, all different: accident, stroke, drowning, suicide, 1 house fire. 2 disappearances later declared deaths." Evelyn scrolled through the records. The ages ranged from 19 to 73. Men and women. No shared employer, insurer, bank, physician, or address. Marcus Bell, alive for now. The phrase hung between them. Evelyn called the Ohio Distribution Center, where Bell worked. Human Resources said he had not reported for his shift and had not answered his phone. She requested a welfare check through local police, identifying herself and the potential fraud. At 10:16, Officer Lena Morris called from Bell's apartment. "He's not here," Morris said. Door was unlocked. No signs of a struggle. Anything unusual. A pause. Depends what you call unusual. Try me. There are funeral programs all over the place. For whom? Marcus Bell. Evelyn sat straighter. He's alive. I know. His driver's license is on the kitchen table, and the picture matches the neighbor's description. But the programs say he died yesterday. Yesterday was October 17. What kind of service? Evelyn asked. Memorial service at St. Bartholomew's, Friday at 11. There's an obituary too. Looks professionally printed. Who provided the information? His sister, according to the program. We called her. She says she hasn't spoken to him in 6 years and didn't arrange anything. Search the apartment for photographs of Daniel Vale. Who? Just look. Morris returned 9 minutes later, her voice lower. We found a photo taped beneath his desk drawer. Old cemetery scene. People with umbrellas. Evelyn gripped the phone. Is there a man standing behind a fence? Yes. Describe him. Tall, thin, dark coat. Face isn't clear. Morris breathed away from the receiver, then returned. There is writing on the back. What does it say? Don't let him learn your name. Evelyn asked the officer to email photographs of everything and to place an alert on Belle's vehicle. When the call ended, she told Peters to find every surviving relative of Daniel Vale and every person who had used his number. Every person is dead, he reminded her. Then find whoever buried them. At noon, security delivered the access report. Evelyn read it while eating crackers at her desk. Her badge had been used to enter the 5th floor at 3:17 that morning. She had been asleep in her apartment 12 miles away. The report listed no exit. She checked her wallet. Her badge was there. Security pulled camera footage. The corridor outside Special Claims appeared empty at 3:17. The door opened by itself and remained open for 11 seconds. The camera inside the office malfunctioned during the same interval, its image replaced by a frozen frame from the previous afternoon. In that frozen frame, Evelyn sat at her desk with her back to the camera. A man stood behind her. The image had not been present in the original recording. Peters leaned closer to the monitor. Is that Vale? Evelyn enlarged the frame. The man's face dissolved into compression artifacts, but his left ear was bent at the rim. His hand rested on the back of her chair. Call the police, Peter said, and tell them what? That someone broke in. Someone used my badge without possessing it, appeared only in a corrupted frame, and left no physical trace. Peters looked toward the dark glass of the conference room wall. Then tell them you have a stalker. Evelyn did call. She made the report ordinary enough to survive. Suspicious communication, possible file tampering, unauthorized access. A detective took notes and advised her not to meet anyone alone. At 2:30, the first email from Officer Morris arrived. The apartment photographs showed funeral programs stacked on the couch, arranged across the floor, pinned to the bedroom walls. Each program displayed the same portrait of Marcus Bell, but the dates and locations differed. Some placed his death in Ohio, others in Kentucky, Nebraska, or Maine. The earliest service was dated 12 years before Bell had used Daniel Vale's number. The cemetery photograph was attached as a high-resolution scan. Evelyn compared it to the damaged image from Harrow Mutual. It had been taken from a slightly different angle. Perhaps seconds later, Ruth Vale stood near the open grave, turned toward the fence. The man beneath the elm was gone, but another figure had appeared among the mourners. He stood directly behind Ruth, wearing Daniel Vale's burned and torn clothes. His face was blackened beyond recognition. One hand rested on her shoulder. No one in the photograph seemed aware of him. Evelyn magnified the hand. The tip of the right index finger was missing. A second email arrived while she watched. The subject line read, "Found your man." Officer Morris had attached a photograph taken from a highway patrol camera 20 miles outside Columbus. Marcus Bell's sedan sat abandoned on the shoulder. In the driver's seat was a human shape covered by a dark overcoat. The final attachment was a close-up through the windshield. The driver's face had been burned until the features were gone. On the fogged glass, someone had written from the inside, not MARCUS. Chapter 3. The Widow. Ruth Vale lived in a 2-story farmhouse outside Bellwether, Indiana, where the cornfields ended at a wall of woods. Evelyn drove there on Thursday beneath a colorless sky. The police had identified the body in Marcus Bell's car through fingerprints. It was not Bell. It was Officer Lena Morris, though she had spoken to dispatch from Bell's apartment less than an hour before the highway camera recorded the vehicle. The department would not discuss the discrepancy. Detective Sloan, assigned to Evelyn's stalking complaint, suggested she take leave from work. Evelyn did not take leave. She carried the original claim file, the printed photograph, and a small digital recorder. She also carried a canister of pepper spray she knew would be useless against the thing she had not yet allowed herself to name. Ruth opened the farmhouse door before Evelyn knocked. She was 64, silver-haired, and painfully thin. Her eyes went immediately to the claim folder. "You're from Harrow," she said. "Yes, Evelyn Cross. You should go. I need to ask about your husband. My husband is dead. His social security number is being used." Ruth's face changed, not surprise, recognition. She stepped outside and closed the door behind her. "Did you come alone?" "Yes." "Did anyone follow you?" "I don't think so." "That means you didn't look." Ruth walked past her without a coat, scanning the road and the tree line. At the edge of the porch, she knelt and pressed 2 fingers to the wet boards, as though checking for vibration. Then she stood. "You have 5 minutes." Inside, the house smelled of cedar, dust, and something medicinal. Every mirror had been covered with brown paper. The family photographs on the walls had been turned face down or painted over. Names had been scratched from envelopes, magazines, prescription bottles, even canned food labels. Ruth led Evelyn into the kitchen. "What did Daniel tell you?" Evelyn asked. "Nothing that made sense until after he died." "Did you see him at the funeral?" Ruth stared at her. "Who showed you the picture?" "It was in the claim file." "No, it wasn't. I opened it myself." Ruth crossed the room and locked the kitchen door. "There were 7 photographs. I took one. Daniel took one. The insurance man kept 5. There are 6 in the archive. Then one came back." Evelyn removed the print from its sleeve and placed it on the table. Ruth did not touch it. The color drained from her face. "He wasn't looking at the camera that day," she whispered. "He was in another image. He was looking at me." "What happened after the funeral?" Ruth sat with both hands clenched in her lap. 3 days later, Daniel came home. Evelyn waited. He knocked at the back door just before dawn. He looked sick, thin. He had cuts on his feet, mud on his clothes, and one side of his face was burned. I wanted to touch him, but he backed away. He told me I had to keep believing he was dead. Why, he said something had followed him out of the car. The accident. There was no accident, not the way the police thought. Ruth looked toward the covered mirror above the sink. Daniel worked payroll for a steel parts factory. A few months before he died, he found an employee who had been collecting wages for 11 years without ever reporting to work. No address, no supervisor, no bank account anyone could trace, just a name and a social security number. Every year, the personnel file changed by itself. New photograph, new birth date, same name. What name? Ruth's mouth tightened. He never told me. He said speaking it made things notice you. Evelyn thought of the note behind Marcus Bell's desk. Don't let him learn your name. Daniel tried to remove the employee from payroll, Ruth continued. The next morning, the name was in Daniel's personnel file. His photograph was on the other man's identification card. People at work began calling him by the wrong name. His supervisor insisted Daniel had died years earlier. He staged his death to escape the records. He thought the dead couldn't be replaced. Ruth gave a small, humorless laugh. He found a body at the factory, a homeless man who slept near the furnace vents. Daniel put him in the car, used gasoline, drove it over the quarry edge, and jumped before it went down. Evelyn felt a slow revulsion. An innocent man was buried under his name. Yes, and you knew. Not until after. What followed him? Ruth looked at the ceiling. The house creaked softly in the wind. Daniel said a person is more than flesh. A person is a space in the world, a name on paper, a number in a machine, a face other people remember. When he put another body into that space, he made a vacancy somewhere else. That sounds like guilt. It sounded like madness when he said it. And now you came here. Ruth rose and opened a cabinet. From behind stacked plates, she removed a small medicine bottle. Inside was a black button. He left this at the cemetery, she said. He wanted me to know I wasn't imagining him. Then he disappeared for 15 years. He called you Tuesday night. Ruth's eyes sharpened. How do you know? You received a call. He said it found his name. Did he say where he was? Blackwater. Evelyn wrote it down. A town that no longer exists. The factory was built over it after the reservoir flooded. What happened to Daniel after he visited you? He stayed in motels, used no identification, paid cash, changed his appearance. Every year he called on the anniversary, because that was the only day the thing could use his identity. He said the records opened on the day of death. The people who used his number died. They didn't use it willingly. How can you know that? Ruth stood, crossed to the pantry door, and opened it. The narrow space beyond contained no food. Its walls were covered with obituary clippings, hundreds of them, men, women, children. Each name had been crossed out in black ink. Beside every photograph, Ruth had written another name, then crossed that out too. They called me, she said, all of them. Sometimes months before they died, sometimes hours. They said strangers had started calling them Daniel. Their mail changed. Their families forgot what they looked like. They dreamed of a burned man standing beside an open grave. Evelyn stepped closer to the clippings. One showed Officer Lena Morris. The obituary was dated tomorrow. You printed this? Evelyn asked. It arrived this morning. From whom? There was no envelope. At the bottom of the clipping, beneath the service details, a line of text had been added in a different typeface. EVELYN cross will receive friends. ON Monday. Evelyn's skin tightened. Ruth caught her wrist. It knows your name now. Something knocked 3 times from inside the covered kitchen mirror. Both women froze. The brown paper bowed outward. A fingertip traced slowly across it from the other side, leaving a dark line like wet ash. Ruth dragged Evelyn toward the back door. Don't answer if it speaks. The mirror knocked again. A man's voice came from behind the paper. Ruth, it said gently, let me come home. Ruth's hand trembled on the lock. The voice changed. It became Evelyn's voice. Ruth, it said, she isn't Evelyn. The paper split down the middle. Behind it, the mirror reflected the empty kitchen. In the reflection, however, a burned man stood directly behind them. Evelyn turned. No one was there. When she looked back, the figure had moved closer. Its ruined mouth opened. Ruth pulled the door wide, and they ran into the yard as every covered mirror in the house began knocking at once. Chapter 4. The People Who Died Twice. They stayed in the field until the knocking stopped. Ruth stood barefoot in the dead grass, staring at her house as if it belonged to someone else. Evelyn could see her own car on the gravel drive, but the farmhouse windows reflected a sky darker than the one above them. For several seconds, a tall shape moved behind the upstairs curtains. Is there another way in? Evelyn asked. There are always other ways in. I meant for us. Ruth did not smile. We aren't going back. They crossed the field to an equipment shed with rusted doors. Ruth found an old coat and a pair of rubber boots, then uncovered a pickup truck beneath a tarp. The vehicle started on the 3rd attempt, coughing blue smoke into the cold air. As Ruth drove, Evelyn called Detective Sloane. She described an intruder in the house and omitted the mirrors. Sloane said deputies would respond. Evelyn knew what they would find. Locked doors, no footprints, no broken glass, and perhaps a woman named Evelyn Cross standing in the kitchen insisting she had never left. She switched off her phone. Good, Ruth said. It learns through records first, voices second. You've spent 15 years studying it. I've spent 15 years being afraid. That isn't the same thing. No, fear is more accurate. They drove east through harvested fields. Ruth kept avoiding main roads, turning onto lanes whose names had been removed from their signs. The truck's heater blew lukewarm dust. "Where are we going?" Evelyn asked. "To a man who died twice. His name was Warren Cobb. The federal databases listed Cobb as deceased in 2018, killed when a grain silo collapsed." Daniel Vale's number had been used under Cobb's name 3 weeks before the accident. Harrow's search had found a death certificate, a widow, and a paid life insurance claim. Warren Cobb opened the door of a hunting cabin 2 hours later. He was a broad man in his late 50s, with a white beard and the watchful stillness of someone accustomed to listening for engines. He held a shotgun against his leg. "You brought her here," he said to Ruth. She already opened the file. Then she was already here. Cobb looked at Evelyn. "Say your name." Ruth intervened. "Don't. I need to know whether she still has it." Evelyn met his gaze. "You know who I am." "Maybe I do. Maybe the thing behind you wants me to think I do." She did not turn. "There is nothing behind me." Cobb's eyes shifted over her shoulder. "That's what it likes you to say." He let them inside. The cabin had no electricity, telephone, or running water. Its windows were painted black. Every object that might carry a serial number had been scraped clean. Cobb wore no watch, and the shotgun's manufacturer markings had been filed away. On a table lay stacks of Polaroids. Each showed Cobb holding that day's newspaper beside his face. "Proof of life," he said. "1 photograph every morning. I burn them after 7 days." "Who needs proof?" Evelyn asked. "I do." He poured coffee from a dented pot. It tasted burned and metallic. Cobb had worked as a maintenance foreman at the same steel parts factory as Daniel. In 2017, 6 years after Vale's death, he found a man sleeping in the locker room after midnight. He was wearing Daniel's old work shirt, Cobb said. Name patch and everything. Face burned black. I thought he was hurt, so I got close. He asked me what year it was. What did you tell him? The truth. Then he asked my name. Cobb rubbed both hands over his beard. I told him. Stupidest thing I ever did. The next morning, his time card displayed Daniel Vale. His foreman called him Daniel. His wife, Marcy, laughed when he corrected her, then became angry. By evening, she insisted Warren Cobb had been her first husband and had died before they met. He showed me photographs, Cobb said. Wedding pictures, Christmas, our daughter's birth. I was gone from everyone. Daniel Vale stood where I'd been. How did you survive? Evelyn asked. I died. Cobb had entered a grain silo alone and triggered a controlled collapse. He crawled out through an inspection chute after rescue crews abandoned the search. They recovered part of a body from the corn, enough for a rushed identification after his dental chart was mysteriously replaced with Daniel Vale's. Whose body? Evelyn asked. Cobb stared into his coffee. A drifter I'd seen near the rail yard. Ruth closed her eyes. You murdered him, Evelyn said. I made a vacancy, Cobb replied. That's the only thing it accepts. The cabin seemed colder. You're saying the entity stops pursuing someone if another person is buried under his name. For a while, it gets confused by official death. Flesh says one thing, paper says another. It has to choose which person to follow. And the innocent person. Cobb's jaw worked. He becomes the door. Evelyn thought of the burned figure in the funeral photograph. One hand on Ruth's shoulder. The bodies used in the false deaths come back. Not the bodies, the emptiness they leave. Cobb showed her a notebook containing names and dates. Most matched the list Peters had compiled. Beside each victim was another name, often unidentified, homeless, missing, or buried under disputed circumstances. Each person who used Daniel's number staged a death. Evelyn asked. Some did, some were used by somebody else. Once the number enters your life, you have two choices. Give it a death, or let it take yours. Why Daniel's number? Because he was the first one who escaped after it chose him. Ruth shook her head. Not the first. Cobb looked at her sharply. Daniel found records from Blackwater, she said. The factory employee existed before the factory. The fire in the stove popped. What records? Evelyn asked. Flood relocation lists, Ruth said. When Blackwater was evacuated for the reservoir, one resident appeared on every list, but no census. Same name, different ages. Sometimes a child, sometimes an old man. Daniel thought the name went back to the town's founding. Tell her the name, Cobb said. Ruth's face tightened. No. She needs to recognize it. Recognizing it is how it enters. Cobb leaned toward Evelyn. You already saw the name. In the file. Maybe on a label, a login, a signature. It hides inside ordinary things until you read it aloud. I haven't read anything aloud. Did someone ask who was speaking on the phone? Evelyn remembered the call. Who is speaking? The dead one. Cobb watched her expression. You asked for its name, didn't you? I asked who was speaking. An invitation is an invitation. A vehicle engine sounded in the distance. Cobb stood instantly and extinguished the lantern. No headlights approached through the cracks around the painted windows. The engine grew louder, then stopped outside. 3 car doors opened. Evelyn reached for her phone before remembering it was off. Police, she whispered. No one knows this cabin exists, Cobb said. Footsteps crossed the porch. A woman knocked gently. Warren, she called. It's Marcy. Cobb's face collapsed. Ruth caught his sleeve. Your wife is dead. I know. Warren, the woman called again. You can come home now. Another voice joined hers, a younger woman. Dad. Cobb raised the shotgun. Evelyn moved toward the rear door, but Ruth blocked her. It wants us separated. The voices outside multiplied. A child called for his mother. a man asked to be let out of the rain. Officer Morris said Evelyn's name in the weary tone she had used on the telephone. Peters complained that the office printer was jammed. Daniel Vale whispered Ruth's name. Then Evelyn heard her own mother. "Evie," the voice said from the porch. "You never came to identify me." Her mother had died 9 years earlier in a hospital in Seattle. Evelyn had arrived after the cremation because a storm canceled her flight. The guilt remained too private for anyone to weaponize. She took one step toward the door. Ruth slapped her. The sound was sharp in the dark cabin. "That's not her," Ruth said. The porch boards creaked beneath many feet. Something moved along the walls, scratching slowly at the wood. Not one thing, dozens. Cobb backed toward the stove. It brought the vacancies. The painted windows began to bow inward. Hands pressed against the glass from outside, pale shapes silhouetted beneath the black paint. Some had too many fingers. Some had none. The front door trembled in its frame. Cobb shoved the notebook into Evelyn's hands. "There is a drainage tunnel under the woodpile. It opens near the creek." "You're coming," Ruth said. "They came for me. They came for all of us." Cobb opened the stove and lifted a burning log with iron tongs. "Then make sure they find only one." The front door split near the lock. Through the crack, Evelyn saw a row of faces crowded together in the rain. Their mouths moved in different rhythms, but one voice came from all of them. "Evelyn Cross," they said. Cobb threw the burning log against the wall. Kerosene ignited in a bright sheet. The cabin filled with orange light, and for one instant Evelyn saw the people outside clearly. Each face was a funeral photograph. Officer Morris, Marcus Bell, the drifter buried as Warren Cobb, the nameless man in Daniel Vale's coffin. Hundreds more, their skin wet with grave soil, their eyes fixed on Evelyn. Cobb fired through the door. Ruth dragged Evelyn toward the rear. As the cabin erupted into flame, they crawled beneath the woodpile and dropped into the drainage tunnel. Behind them, the shotgun fired twice more. Then came a noise like an entire congregation inhaling. Warren Cobb screamed only once. By the time they reached the creek, fire had consumed the roof. Figures stood around the cabin without attempting to enter. They watched the flames as though attending another funeral. One man remained apart from the others. He wore a dark overcoat. His face was not burned. Daniel Vale raised one hand to Ruth. Then the roof collapsed, and every figure vanished into the sparks. Chapter 5, BLACKWATER. The reservoir appeared after midnight. A black surface stretched between hills. Ruth drove with both hands rigid on the wheel. They had taken Cobb's truck because her pickup would be easy to identify. Smoke clung to their clothes. Evelyn held the notebook on her lap and tried not to think about the voices outside the cabin. Cobb's notes contained directions to Blackwater, though the town did not appear on current maps. State Route 6 crossed the northern edge of the reservoir. An abandoned service road descended from there through forest to the old factory grounds. "What are we looking for?" Evelyn asked. "Daniel." And if the man in the overcoat wasn't Daniel? Ruth stared ahead. "Then I have spent 15 years loving the wrong ghost." They reached a locked barrier at 1:12 a.m. beyond it. Weeds broke through the service road. A warning sign identified the area as property of the Mid-State Water Authority and prohibited entry because of unstable ground. Ruth cut the chain with bolt cutters from Cobb's truck. The road descended through bare trees. On the left, the reservoir flashed between trunks like a piece of night sky laid flat on the earth. On the right, the land rose into shale cliffs. After a mile, they found the factory. The original steel parts plant had closed in 2019. Its newer buildings were gutted, windows smashed, loading bays open to darkness. Behind them stood an older brick structure half submerged at the reservoir's edge. Water filled its lower floor. Ruth parked near the employee entrance. The security gate was open. Inside, their flashlights swept across rusted lockers and safety posters curled by damp. Time clocks hung on the wall, each frozen at 3:17. Evelyn opened Cobb's notebook to the factory map. Payroll was upstairs. A sound traveled through the building. Clack, pause, clack, an old mechanical time clock stamping cards. Ruth whispered. He said the records opened on the day of death. It isn't October 17th anymore. Ruth checked the truck's analog watch, then remembered they had crossed into another time zone near the state line. It might be here. They climbed a stairwell littered with dead moths. Every landing contained a mirror used for safety around blind corners. Each mirror had been turned to face the wall. The payroll office door stood open. Rows of filing cabinets filled the room. Most drawers had been pulled out and emptied. Papers lay ankle-deep across the floor, swollen by moisture. At the far end, a desk lamp burned. Daniel Vale sat beneath it. He was older than the driver's license photograph, but unmistakable. His hair was white at the temples, his broken nose more pronounced, his left ear bent. A scar climbed from his collar to his jaw. His right index finger ended at the first knuckle. Ruth stopped breathing. Daniel looked at her, and for a moment the fear left his face. "You shouldn't have come." She crossed the room and struck him. The sound echoed among the cabinets. Then she held his face in both hands. Daniel closed his eyes. Evelyn remained near the door. "How do we know you're Daniel Vale?" He opened his eyes. "You don't. That's not useful. It's the only honest answer left." He wore no identification. On the desk before him lay a ledger, a Polaroid camera, and a revolver. The ledger's pages were filled with names written and crossed out thousands of times. Daniel nodded toward Cobb's notebook. Warren. Dead, Evelyn said. He died 8 years ago. He died again tonight. Daniel looked down. Then the vacancy finally found him. Ruth pulled away. You called me. I had to warn you. You had 15 years. If I'd come home, it would have learned you sooner. It learned me anyway. Daniel's gaze shifted to Evelyn. And now it has someone new. Evelyn placed the altered funeral photograph on the desk. Explain this. He did not touch it. Photographs are records. Records are doors. Stop speaking in riddles. It isn't a ghost. Ghosts belong to bodies. This belongs to names. Daniel opened the ledger to a page dated 1886. The handwriting was brown and faded. Blackwater had been founded around a paper mill. The town registrar, Silas Rook, kept birth, marriage, property, and death records in a one-room courthouse. During a winter epidemic, so many people died that coffins were reused, and families buried strangers under familiar names. Rook discovered that if he changed the register, people remembered the change, Daniel said. A dead child entered under another family's name would appear in their photographs. A widow, assigned a different husband, would remember a marriage that never happened. Impossible, Evelyn said. I said the same thing. Rook began selling revisions. Debts vanished when debtors were recorded dead. Criminals acquired the names of infants. Land transferred through invented marriages. The town's memory became as unstable as its records. Then Rook's son died. He erased the death, Daniel said. Not just the entry, every mention of the boy. He believed an unrecorded death could be undone. What happened? Ruth asked. The boy came home. Daniel turned several pages. A newspaper clipping described a series of disappearances. Families reported relatives returning from funerals changed, unable to remember their own names. Photographs showed additional figures standing among mourners. The courthouse register began filling with entries written in no human hand. The same name appeared on every page. Daniel covered it before Evelyn could read. Rook gave the thing a legal identity, he said. Birth date, parents, property. A social security number once the system modernized. He built it a person out of records, but there was no body to hold it. So it borrows people whose identities have gaps. People declared dead while alive, Evelyn said, or people buried under the wrong names. Every false death creates a split. One identity attached to two bodies. One body with no identity. It moves through that space. Why did it choose you? I tried to delete it from payroll. I made myself the empty field, and the man you burned in your car. Daniel's face tightened. His name was Owen Pike. He wasn't homeless. He had a sister in Terre Haute and a daughter he'd never met. I learned that later. Ruth looked at him, as if seeing the coffin descend again. I thought I was saving us, Daniel said. Instead, I gave the thing a body with no surviving name. Owen became the first vacancy, the burned man in the photographs. Evelyn said. He isn't Owen anymore. He is everyone buried under someone else's name. A timed clock stamped in the corridor. Clack. Daniel stood. It knows we're here. Can it be stopped? Evelyn asked. The original register is beneath the reservoir, in the old courthouse records vault. Rook's identity exists because the first entry still exists. Destroy the page. Destroy the legal person. Why haven't you done it? The vault is underwater most of the year. Tonight, the authority lowers the reservoir for dam inspection. At 3:17, the courthouse roof clears the surface for 11 minutes. Evelyn stared at the frozen clocks. You planned this for 15 years. Then why use your number? Why lead us here? I didn't. Daniel's voice was nearly a whisper. The thing used it to find replacements. Every anniversary, it opened my identity and pushed pieces of itself into strangers. I followed the transactions, tried to warn them, sometimes helped them disappear. I failed more often than I succeeded. Marcus Bell, alive when I last saw him. Where? Daniel looked toward the dark doorway. He came here yesterday. A soft, dragging noise moved through the paper on the floor. Evelyn aimed her flashlight downward. A funeral program slid between her shoes. The cover displayed her photograph. Evelyn Marie Cross. 1980, 8/2026. The program opened by itself. Inside was a list of pallbearers. Daniel Vale, Ruth Vale, Marcus Bell, Warren Cobb, Officer Lena Morris. The sixth name was Owen Pike. From inside the filing cabinets, hundreds of voices began whispering Evelyn's name. Daniel seized the revolver. Don't answer them. Every drawer opened at once. The room filled with the smell of wet earth. Chapter 6. The Register. Paper rose from the floor in a single violent breath. It circled the room like a flock of white birds, pages striking Evelyn's face and hands. Each carried a different record: death certificates, marriage licenses, employee forms, school registrations, arrest reports. Her name appeared on all of them. Evelyn Cross, deceased. Evelyn Cross, missing. Evelyn Cross, married to Daniel Vale. Evelyn Cross, mother of a child born in Blackwater in 1886. The facts changed faster than she could read. Ruth screamed. A filing drawer had closed around her wrist. Daniel pulled it open, tearing the skin from her hand. From inside the cabinet, something gripped the back of the drawer and pulled. Evelyn saw fingers between the hanging folders. They were black with burns and jointed the wrong way. Daniel fired. The muzzle flash turned the office white. The hand vanished. The cabinet continued whispering. Stairs, Daniel shouted. They forced their way into the corridor. The safety mirrors had turned outward. Each reflected a different version of the hallway. In one, the factory was new and brightly lit, workers passing in clean uniforms. In another, water filled the corridor to to the ceiling. In a third, Evelyn walked alone between rows of coffins. She kept her eyes on the floor. At the stairwell, Marcus Bell waited for them. He wore the same clothes shown in his employee photograph: work boots, jeans, blue jacket. He was pale, unshaven, and bleeding from one ear. "Miss Cross," he said, "I knew you'd come." Daniel raised the revolver. "Say your own name." The man smiled faintly. "You first." Ruth whispered, "Marcus." He looked at her with genuine confusion. "Who is Marcus?" Daniel fired. The bullet struck the man's shoulder and spun him against the wall. No blood appeared. Instead, black water poured from the wound. The corridor lights came on one by one. Though the building had no power, the man straightened. His face shifted not physically, but in Evelyn's perception. She knew him as Marcus Bell, then Warren Cobb, then Peters, then her father, dead since she was 12. Each identity arrived with a complete memory attached. For one sickening second, she remembered growing up with Daniel Vale as her older brother. "Don't look at him," Daniel shouted. They ran downward. The man followed without hurrying. Every time his shoes touched a stair, a mechanical clock stamped somewhere below. At ground level, water had entered the factory. It covered the lobby floor to Evelyn's ankles, cold enough to numb her feet through her shoes. Outside the broken doors, the reservoir had withdrawn from the shore, exposing a broad slope of mud, drowned trees, and the roofs of Blackwater. The town emerged beneath the moon. Chimneys leaned from the mud. Church steeples lay broken. Streets appeared as trenches between collapsed buildings. At the lowest point, perhaps half a mile away, stood the courthouse roof. Daniel checked a pocket watch. 7 minutes. They descended the slope. Mud pulled at their legs. Dead fish twitched in shallow pools. The air smelled of rot released after decades underwater. Behind them, Marcus, or the thing wearing him, stepped from the factory. Others followed. Warren Cobb walked beside Officer Morris. A burned man in Daniel's old clothes held Ruth's black funeral umbrella. Children in antique nightshirts climbed from the exposed houses. Some had stones tied around their waists. Some carried framed photographs instead of faces. None of them sank into the mud. The courthouse roof rose higher as the water level fell. A square cupola broke the surface, then second-story windows. Daniel led them to a maintenance boat stranded near an old road. Beneath it, a stone staircase descended into brown water. "The vault is in the basement," he said. Ruth looked at the drowned doorway. "There isn't time." There was never enough time. Daniel tied a rope around his waist and handed the other end to Evelyn. From the boat, he took diving masks, compact air cylinders, and waterproof lamps. "You prepared for 3 people," Evelyn said. "I prepared for Ruth to follow me." Ruth stared at him. "You knew." "I knew you." For the first time, something like tenderness passed between them. Then the crowd reached the old road. The drowned dead stopped 50 yards away. The man with Marcus Bell's face continued forward. "Daniel," he called, "you can have your life back." Daniel tightened the cylinder straps. "It doesn't offer anything it hasn't already stolen. Ruth remembers you. The world can remember you. We can put Owen piked back in his own grave." At that name, the burned man beneath the umbrella lifted his head. His face was no longer ruined. He was perhaps 40, with tired eyes and a narrow mustache. A photograph frame hung from his neck. Inside it, a little girl sat on his shoulders. Daniel faltered. "You left him nameless," the figure said. "You left his daughter fatherless. Give him yours, and both of you can be whole." Ruth seized Daniel's hand. "Don't listen." The figure turned to Evelyn. "She knows what it is to leave the dead alone." Evelyn heard her mother's voice again. Not from the crowd, from beneath the water. "Evie." Bubbles rose on the flooded staircase. Her mother appeared below the surface, hospital gown drifting around her, one hand extended. Her face was exactly as Evelyn remembered before illness hollowed it. Evelyn stepped into the water. Daniel slapped the mask over her face and pushed the regulator between her teeth. "Memory is another record," he said. "It edits that too." They descended. The water swallowed all sound except their breathing. Their lamps cut narrow tunnels through suspended silt. The courthouse door stood open beneath them. Inside, desks floated against the ceiling. Shelves had collapsed. Old papers moved in the current without dissolving, their ink dark and fresh. The rope connected Evelyn to Daniel. Ruth followed close behind. They passed a courtroom where bodies sat upright in the gallery, held in place by belts or rope. Their clothing came from different decades. Some were skeletons. Others looked newly dead. All turned their heads as the lights swept past. On the judge's bench, a man in a black coat wrote in an enormous ledger. His pen continued, moving, though his hand was bone. Daniel pulled Evelyn onward. The basement stairs descended into colder darkness. At the bottom waited an iron door marked records. 3 locks hung open from its handle. Daniel hesitated. He had expected resistance. An open door was worse. They entered the vault. Rows of shelves stretched beyond the reach of their lamps. Impossible within the courthouse's dimensions. Boxes were labeled with years that had not happened yet. 2027, 2034, 2091. Evelyn's light found a cabinet labeled cross. EVELYN-MARIE. Inside were photographs of her childhood. She had never seen. School records from cities where she had never lived. And a death certificate signed that morning by Detective Sloan. At the bottom lay a Polaroid still developing. The image clarified in her hand. It showed Ruth and Daniel standing in the vault. Evelyn was not in the photograph. Something tugged the rope around her waist. She turned. Daniel and Ruth were gone. The rope extended into darkness. Her regulator stopped delivering air. Evelyn pulled it free and struck the cylinder. Nothing. She had perhaps a minute before panic emptied her lungs. A lamp appeared between the shelves. Her mother approached carrying it. No bubbles left her mouth when she spoke. "You came this time," she said. Evelyn backed away, holding her breath. Her mother's hair moved gently in the water. "I waited for you to identify me. They asked whether the body was mine, and no one knew." Evelyn shook her head. "You let strangers put my name on ashes." The words entered Evelyn's mind without sound. She remembered the hospital's mistake. 2 women had died within an hour. The identification bracelet had been damaged. The cremation had occurred before Evelyn arrived. She had signed the final documents based on photographs. A body buried under the wrong name. A vacancy. Her mother smiled sadly. "It has been in your family for 9 years." Behind her, rows of faces appeared between the shelves. Evelyn's lungs convulsed. Her mother extended the lamp. "Give me your name, and I'll give you mine." Evelyn saw the trick then. The thing could alter records and memories, but it still needed consent. A question answered, a name spoken, an identity offered into the empty space. She closed her mouth and let the darkness take her. A hand seized her harness. Daniel dragged her backward through the vault. Ruth forced a spare regulator between Evelyn's teeth. Air struck her lungs painfully. They had never disappeared. The photograph had made her stop seeing them. Daniel pointed ahead. At the center of the vault stood a wooden lectern chained to the floor. On it rested the original Blackwater register, swollen but intact beneath the water. The cover opened by itself. Pages turned rapidly, years flashing past. Every entry had been crossed out except one. The name was written in heavy black ink, Silas Rook. Evelyn read it before she could look away. The vault lights came on. A man stood behind the lectern. He was tall and narrow, dressed in an undertaker's suit from another century. His face was a smooth absence, featureless except for a mouth shaped like a line cut in paper. He raised his hand. Across the shelves, every box labeled with a future year opened. The dead began to climb out. Chapter 7, 11 Minutes. Silas Rook did not move through the water. The water moved through him. His coat hung straight, untouched by the current. Where his face should have reflected their lamps, the light vanished. Only the thin mouth remained visible, opening and closing as though reading names from an invisible page. Daniel swam toward the register. Rook lifted one finger. The rope around Daniel's waist tightened and pulled him backward. Not the rope itself, Evelyn realized. Hands had emerged from the dark to grip it, dozens of pale hands reaching from the shelves. Ruth cut him free with a diving knife. The register's pages turned again. A fresh sheet appeared. Letters formed in wet black strokes. Daniel Aaron Vale, deceased October 17, 2011. 2011. Body RECOVRD. Identity confirmed. Daniel convulsed, his scarred face blistered as if exposed to fire. His clothing shredded into the burned garments from the funeral photographs. Black water poured from his mouth. Ruth tried to hold him, but he struck her away in panic. Evelyn understood. Rook was not attacking his body. It was enforcing the record. She ripped the page from the ledger. The paper resisted like skin. When it tore, a shock passed through the vault. Shelves tipped. The lights failed. Daniel's face returned to normal, though blood leaked behind his mask. Rook turned toward Evelyn. The line of his mouth widened. Every document in the vault began speaking at once. Birth certificates cried like infants. Marriage licenses whispered vows. Arrest records shouted names and charges. Death certificates exhaled final breaths. The sound entered through Evelyn's mask and vibrated in her teeth. Ruth reached the lectern and drove her knife through the register. The blade stopped halfway, embedded as if in stone. Daniel pointed upward. Their time was nearly gone. When the reservoir gates closed, the courthouse would vanish beneath millions of tons of water. Evelyn tore another page. Beneath it lay the original entry for Silas Rook, born February 3, 1842. PARENTS, unknown. The word unknown had been overwritten so many times, it formed a black hole in the paper. Below the birth entry was a death entry. Date none. Cause none. Body none. Rook had not merely erased his son's death. He had transferred the erasure to himself. He had created a person whom the records recognized. But death could not complete. Daniel took the revolver from his waterproof bag and fired into the lectern. The bullet flattened against the register. Rook's hand closed around Daniel's throat. In an instant, Daniel became younger. His white hair darkened. The scar vanished. Ruth stared at the husband she had lost 15 years earlier. He looked at her through the mask. Then he changed again. He became the burned body in the car. Then Warren Cobb. Then Marcus Bell. Then a little boy in old-fashioned clothes. Rook was flipping through identities, searching for one that would hold him. Evelyn opened Cobb's notebook. Ink swirled away in the water, but one sentence remained visible on the inside cover. A record needs a witness. That was why Rook lured people to funerals. Why photographs changed only after someone saw them. Why he needed names spoken aloud. A record without a witness was merely paper. Evelyn pulled the Polaroid camera from Daniel's equipment bag. Ruth understood before he did. She took the camera and aimed it at Rook. The flash burst through the vault. The instant photograph slid into the water. Rook released Daniel. On the white square, an image slowly formed. The lectern, the register, the shelves, and no man behind them. Rook turned toward the photograph. His blank face rippled. Evelyn pointed at the image and shook her head. No witness, No body, no person. Rook's mouth opened wide enough to divide his face. The vault filled with voices, begging them to look at him. Evelyn shut her eyes. Ruth did the same. Daniel hesitated. Through the water, a child's voice called, "Father." Daniel looked. Rook entered him. Daniel's body arched. His mask tore away. For a second, his face became smooth and blank. Then features returned Daniel's eyes, Daniel's broken nose, Daniel's bent ear, but the mouth remained a narrow cut. He seized the register. Ruth opened her eyes and saw him. Daniel. His head turned too slowly. Evelyn grabbed Ruth and pulled her back. Daniel, or Rook, placed one hand on the birth entry. New letters appeared beneath Silas Rook's name. Witness Ruth Vale. Ruth's mask filled with blood from her nose. Her memories were being written into the page. Evelyn could see it in her expression. The sudden recognition, the impossible affection. Ruth reached toward the thing wearing her husband. Evelyn struck her regulator, knocking it free. Shock broke the spell. Ruth clawed for air while Evelyn dragged her toward the door. Daniel followed, carrying the register. The vault ceiling groaned. The reservoir was returning. A current tore through the courthouse. Boxes burst from shelves and spun into darkness. Future death certificates wrapped around Evelyn's arms. One showed her body recovered from the reservoir. Another showed no body at all. She ripped them away. They swam up the basement stairs as water pressure slammed doors and lifted furniture. The courtroom bodies tore free of their restraints. Skeletons drifted from the gallery, reaching with broken fingers. Daniel followed without swimming, walking along the floor. Ruth kept turning to look at him. Each time she did, he appeared more human. At the courthouse entrance, the current became a river. Evelyn and Ruth were thrown against the stone frame. The rope tangled around a railing. Daniel stood below them, untouched by the flow. He removed the mask he did not need. "Ruth," he said in Daniel's voice, "you know me." She stopped fighting the rope. Evelyn cut it. They shot upward through the flooded stairway and broke the surface beneath the maintenance boat. The sky had begun to pale. Water surged across the exposed streets, swallowing Blackwater again. Evelyn pushed Ruth onto the mud slope. Behind them, Daniel emerged from the courthouse roof, carrying the register against his chest. The drowned crowd knelt. Every figure turned its face toward him. Ruth stood. "Daniel." The man looked up. For 1 second, terror appeared in his eyes. The real Daniel was still inside, trapped behind the identity that wore him. He raised the register above his head. Then he threw it into the deepest part of the reservoir. Rook's mouth opened in a silent scream. The drowned dead rushed him. They pulled Daniel beneath the water as the courthouse disappeared. Ruth tried to follow. Evelyn held her until the surface became still. Only one object remained floating near the shore, a Polaroid photograph. Evelyn picked it up. The image showed the three of them in the vault. Ruth and Evelyn stood with their eyes closed. Daniel faced the camera. Behind his face, barely visible, was another face made from overlapping names. On the white border, a date developed slowly. October 17, 2027. 1 year from now. Chapter 8. The RETURNED woman. By sunrise, Blackwater was gone. The reservoir lay smooth beneath a white sky. No courthouse roof broke the surface. No drowned streets remained. Search crews would later find the cut chain at the service road and tire tracks near the abandoned factory, but no evidence that the water level had changed. Evelyn and Ruth walked 7 miles before a highway patrol officer found them. They told the same story: car trouble, disorientation, a fall near the reservoir. Neither mentioned Daniel, the courthouse, or the register. Ruth carried the Polaroid inside her shirt. Evelyn carried Cobb's notebook, though every page had become blank. At the hospital, nurses separated them. A physician examined Evelyn's bruises and asked whether she knew the older woman brought in with her. Ruth Vale, Evelyn said. The physician looked at the admission form. She says her name is Ruth Cross. Evelyn found her in the next room wearing a paper gown. Ruth sat upright on the bed, hands folded, eyes empty with exhaustion. What did you tell them? Evelyn asked. My name. Your name is Ruth Vale. Ruth frowned. Vale. Daniel Vale was your husband. The frown deepened, not with confusion, but concern for Evelyn. I never married. Evelyn took out the funeral photograph. Ruth recoiled from it. I don't know those people. You were there. No, you saw Daniel beneath the elm. He came home 3 days later. You kept a button behind your furnace. Ruth pulled the blanket to her chest. Please leave. Evelyn showed her the Polaroid from the vault. Only 2 figures remained in the image. Evelyn and Daniel stood beside the register. The place where Ruth had been was a pale blur. A hospital security officer entered and asked Evelyn to return to her room. She demanded that Ruth be released into her care. The officer checked the chart and said there was no Ruth Vale admitted to the hospital. The bed behind him was empty. The paper gown lay, folded on the mattress. Evelyn pushed past him into the corridor. Nurses moved between rooms. An orderly rolled a cart around the corner. Ruth had vanished within seconds. The security cameras showed Evelyn entering the room alone and arguing with an empty bed. By noon, Detective Sloan arrived. He was a gray-haired man with the careful manners of someone who had already decided what another person was capable of. He placed a printed report on the tray table. Your vehicle was found at a farmhouse outside Bellwether, he said. The property has been vacant since 2011. It belongs to Ruth Vale. Daniel Vale owned it. His wife died in the same accident he did. Evelyn stared at him. Sloan produced 2 death certificates. Daniel and Ruth Vale, both killed October 17, 2011. The insurance policy listed no beneficiary and no payout. That isn't what the claim file says. What claim file? Harrow Mutual. Policy number HM4 4718021. Sloan turned his phone so she could see the screen. Harrow's public portal returned no record. Evelyn called Peters. His number belonged to a dental office. She called special claims. A receptionist said Harrow Mutual had no department by that name, and no employee named Evelyn Cross. She gave her own employee number. The receptionist became quiet. That number belonged to a woman who died last year, she said. Evelyn hung up. Sloan watched her carefully. Last year, she asked. October 17th. He showed her the report. According to state records, Evelyn Marie Cross had died in a single-car accident. The body had been identified through dental comparison. Her remains had been cremated. Her apartment had been cleared. Her bank accounts were closed. The death certificate carried Evelyn's signature in the box reserved for the informant. I was at work yesterday, she said. Where? Harrow Mutual. Security footage from the building shows you entering an abandoned office floor. Peters was there. My supervisor was there. Hundreds of people work there. Sloan placed another photograph on the table. It showed the 5th floor of Harrow's building after years of vacancy. Ceiling tiles had fallen. Dust covered the desks. At the center sat Evelyn's workstation, clean and illuminated by a desk lamp. On the monitor was the funeral photograph. Behind Evelyn's chair stood Ruth Vale. You broke into the building 3 nights ago, Sloan said. You spent 7 hours talking to people who weren't there. Evelyn looked through the hospital window. In the parking lot below, a man in a dark overcoat stood beside Sloan's unmarked car. His face was Daniel's. He lifted one finger to his lips. When Evelyn turned back, Sloan's badge displayed a different name, Silas Rook. She blinked. The badge again read Detective Harold, Sloan. Who told you I was at the reservoir? She asked. The patrol officer. What was his name? Sloan looked at his notes. I don't remember. Call him. Why? Because by tonight, you won't remember finding me. Sloan sighed and reached for the call button, perhaps to summon a psychiatric consultant. Evelyn moved first. She pulled the intravenous line from her arm, threw the metal stand into his legs, and ran. The hospital corridors seemed to rearrange around her. Signs pointed to departments that did not exist. Identification, CORRECTIONS, unclaimed remains. Every patient room contained a person sitting beside his or her own covered body. A loudspeaker chimed. Evelyn Cross, a pleasant voice announced. Please report to the morgue for identification. Elevator doors opened ahead. Ruth stood inside, wearing her own clothes. Hurry, she said. You remember. For now, they descended to the basement. How did you get away? Evelyn asked. I followed my obituary. Ruth held a hospital newspaper. On the back page was her death notice, including service details at a funeral home 2 blocks away. The time of visitation was now. It is building our funerals, Ruth said. One record at a time. The elevator opened onto a tiled corridor. A sign pointed left to the morgue and right to the parking garage. They went right. Behind them, every cooler door in the morgue opened. Bare feet began slapping against tile. They reached the garage as the hospital alarm sounded. Ruth hotwired an old maintenance van with a skill she said Daniel had taught her. Though seconds later she denied ever knowing anyone named Daniel. Evelyn drove. In the side mirror, hospital staff and patients poured into the garage. They did not chase the van. They stood together beneath the concrete lights and watched it leave. Detective Sloan stood at the front of the crowd. He held a blank death certificate. As the van turned onto the street, he began filling it out. Chapter 9. The CLAIMS Adjuster. The original Vale claim had been handled by Franklin Heller. Evelyn remembered his name from the handwritten note about revering a policy if the insured returned. Cobb's notebook was blank. Harrow's database no longer acknowledged the claim, and Peters had been erased from every directory she could access. Heller was the only witness whose identity might remain outside the altered records. They found him through a retirement announcement, preserved in an insurance trade magazine at the public library. Franklin Heller, 38 years of service, volunteer historian, amateur photographer, resident of St. Agnes Continuing Care, Fort Wayne. Ruth slept in the van while Evelyn searched. By evening, she had forgotten Daniel again. Evelyn stopped correcting her. Each correction seemed to cause Ruth pain, as though the name were a hook being pulled through her memories. St. Agnes occupied a former convent behind high brick walls. Heller lived in a private room on the 3rd floor. He was 91 and nearly blind. But when Evelyn introduced herself, he said, "You took longer than the others." What others? The investigators. How many? 7 since Daniel Vale. Where are they? Heller smiled without humor. You know where. His room contained no photographs. Instead, hundreds of undeveloped film canisters filled labeled boxes. He had covered the television screen with a towel and removed the glass from the window frame, leaving cold air to enter through a mesh barrier. Ruth sat near the door, watching him with suspicion. Heller pointed toward her. The widow lasted longer than I expected. She is being erased, Evelyn said. No, she is being corrected. What does that mean? The record now says she died with Daniel. Memory follows records. Soon her body will follow memory. Ruth whispered, I don't feel dead. Most people don't at first. Heller asked Evelyn to open the bottom drawer of his dresser. Inside lay 7 claim folders. Each bore the name of an investigator and a red stamp. Closed, insured deceased. The last folder was hers. She opened it. The report described everything she had done since Tuesday, including events that had occurred with no witnesses. The voices outside Cobb's cabin, her mother's appearance in the vault, the hospital escape. The final page predicted that she would visit Heller at 7:23 p.m. The clock beside his bed read 7:22. Evelyn closed the folder. Who wrote this? I did. You couldn't know. I didn't, the words appear. At 7:23, a new sentence formed beneath the last paragraph. The investigator will ask about the missing photograph. Evelyn felt the room shrink around her. Heller said, ask. There were 7 funeral photographs. Ruth took 1. Daniel took 1. Harrow kept 5. 6 appeared in the archive. Which one came back? The one I destroyed. Why? Because it showed who was inside the coffin. Heller reached beneath his mattress and removed a sealed envelope. The paper had yellowed around the edges. He gave it to Evelyn, but turned his face away as she opened it. The photograph showed Daniel Vale's coffin before burial, lid raised for a final identification. The body was burned beyond recognition. Beside the coffin stood Ruth, the minister, and Heller. At the back of the chapel, Daniel Vale watched through a doorway. That was not the disturbing part. The burned body in the coffin had lifted one hand and pointed at Heller. Written across the inner lid, visible only from the camera's angle, were 4 words. Franklin Heller is next. You saw the hand move? Evelyn asked. Not until the film was developed. I burned the negative, the print, and every copy. It returned in my files a year later. Why are you still alive? I gave it claims. Ruth stood. You fed people to it. Heller looked toward the open window. I redirected suspicious cases. People already planning false deaths. Criminals, mostly. Men who burned businesses with employees inside. Women who poisoned spouses for policies. I attached Daniel's number to their files and let the vacancy choose. 27 people, Evelyn said. 34. 7 investigators aren't in your list. You knew what would happen. I knew what might happen. In exchange, it left me uncorrected. Evelyn wanted to despise him. Then she remembered Warren Cobb's drifter, Daniel's Owen Pike, the body that had replaced her mother. Everyone who survived had paid with someone else's identity. What does it want now? A permanent witness. Ruth, you. Heller tapped her folder. Insurance is belief made contractual. A death certificate says a person died. A policy pays because institutions agree. A claim investigator decides which version of death becomes official. Rook has spent more than a century borrowing identities. With you, it can certify itself. I won't. You already opened the claim. The new sentence continued writing. The investigator will deny consent. The denial will be recorded as acknowledgement. Evelyn tore the page in half. Both pieces continued writing. Heller laughed softly. You can't argue with a form. Every answer fills a field. Ruth took the folder and threw it through the open window. Pages scattered into the courtyard. Below, residents of St. Agnes stopped walking. Each person bent to pick up a page. They read Evelyn's name aloud. 100 elderly voices rose through the dark. Evelyn Cross, Evelyn Cross, Evelyn Cross. Heller began to cry. It came early, he said. The hallway lights went out. From the corridor came the squeak of a gurney wheel. Heller pulled the towel from the television. The screen was black, but it reflected the room. In the reflection, a coffin occupied the bed. The lid opened. Heller's younger self sat inside, wearing an adjuster suit. Behind him stood the 7 missing investigators. Franklin, they said together, your claim has been approved. The old man clutched Evelyn's hand. There is one way to break it. What? Name the bodies. The gurney stopped outside the door. Every vacancy began with someone buried incorrectly, Heller whispered. Restore the first names. Make witnesses remember who was actually in each grave. Tell, I kept the negatives. He pointed to the film boxes. The door handle turned. Ruth shoved a dresser against it. The wood shook as something struck from the hallway. Heller gave Evelyn a brass key. Basement archive, room B9. Take all of it. You're coming with us. No, my policy matured a long time ago. The door split around the lock. Heller reached for the call button and pressed it. Instead of a nurse's tone, a fire alarm sounded throughout the building. Sprinklers burst overhead. Residents screamed in the courtyard. Staff ran toward the exits. Ruth and Evelyn climbed through the open window onto a narrow stone ledge. From inside, Heller began reciting names. Owen Pike, he shouted. Lena Marie Morris, Frederick Cobb, Alice Thorne, Peter James Harlow. The door crashed open. Evelyn saw a burned man push the gurney into the room. On it lay an open coffin filled with black water. Hands rose from the water and seized Heller. He kept shouting names as they pulled him in. The coffin lid closed. The bed was empty. On the television, Franklin Heller stood among the mourners at Daniel Vale's funeral. He looked 91 years old. The camera flashed. Chapter 10, The Archive of the Unnamed. Room B9 was beneath the convent chapel. Ruth and Evelyn reached it through a service stairway, while alarms rang above. The brass key opened a fireproof door disguised behind shelving. Inside, metal cabinets filled a chamber larger than Heller's room. He had preserved every investigation connected to Daniel Vale. Photographs, negatives, recorded interviews, policy applications, police reports, autopsy diagrams, dental charts, and handwritten confessions. On one wall, strings connected false deaths to unidentified bodies. 34 vacancies, 34 stolen names. Evelyn switched on a portable scanner and worked through the files. Ruth read labels aloud until the names began sliding from her memory. After an hour, she asked why they were in the basement. After 2, she could no longer read her own handwriting. Evelyn wrote Ruth Vale across the back of Ruth's hand. Ruth stared at it. Is that me? Yes. Are you sure? No, Evelyn admitted. But you asked me to remember. Heller's archive revealed how the cycle spread. Daniel's false death had not created a single vacancy. It had linked 3 conflicting identities: Daniel alive, Daniel legally dead, and Owen Pike buried as Daniel. Each time someone used Daniel's number, the contradiction attached to a new record. Rook then forced the victim toward a false death, creating another unnamed body and another place to inhabit. The investigators disappeared because they certified claims without identifying the substitute bodies. Their signatures became witnesses to the false version. Evelyn found Peter's in the 7th investigator's file. His full name was Peter James Harlow. He had not been an information security analyst. He had investigated the same pattern in 2022 and died after staging a boat accident. Rook had inserted him into Evelyn's memory as a coworker because she needed technical information to continue opening the claim. The man she had spoken with at Harrow was dead. The realization made every memory of him feel infected. His coffee cup beside her keyboard. His nervous joke about corruption, understanding anniversaries. His reflection in the conference glass. Perhaps those moments had never happened. Perhaps they were happening to someone else now. At the bottom of Daniel's file, Evelyn found a cassette labeled interview. Oh, Pike family. She played it on Heller's recorder. A woman spoke through static. Her name was June Pike, Owen's older sister. She described him as unreliable but gentle, a man who disappeared for weeks and returned with gifts he could not afford. He had called her the night Daniel's car went into the quarry. He said he'd found a wallet at the factory, June said on the tape. Belonged to a man named Silas. He was scared because the photograph kept changing. First, it was an old man, then a little boy, then Owen himself. Evelyn stopped the tape. Daniel had lied. Owen Pike was not chosen randomly. Rook had already entered him. Daniel had used Owen's body because he believed the thing occupied it. Ruth listened without expression. Does that make what he did better? She asked. No. Would you have done it? Evelyn thought of the hospital death certificate, her vanished job, the people chanting her name. I don't know. That means yes. The tape continued. Owen told his sister that a payroll worker had offered to help him. Daniel planned to place his wallet near the burned car, so police would identify the body as Owen and free him from the name. But the following morning, the newspaper reported Daniel Vale dead. Daniel switched them, June said. He promised Owen a grave with his own name. Then he stole even that. A second voice appeared beneath hers on the recording. At first, it was too faint to understand. Evelyn rewound and increased the volume. Daniel whispered, "I couldn't let it know which of us escaped." Then Owen answered from somewhere far from the microphone. It knew. The recorder stopped. Ruth touched the name on her hand. "We have to find June. She would be in her 70s. Or dead. Either way, she is Owen's witness." Heller's records listed a last known address in Terre Haute. Before they left, Evelyn gathered every original photograph and body identification report. Digital records could be altered, but Heller had used chemical film and carbon copies stored without network access. The images still changed when witnessed, yet the physical evidence contained traces Rook had not fully erased. Jewelry, scars, missing teeth, old fractures. They loaded 12 boxes into the maintenance van. At the archive door, Ruth stopped. A full-length mirror hung at the end of the basement corridor. Evelyn was certain it had not been there when they entered. The reflection showed Ruth alone. "You aren't in it," Ruth said. Evelyn looked down at her own body. "Don't trust it." In the mirror, Ruth turned toward empty space and began speaking to no one. "You died last year," reflected Ruth said. "I found you wandering near the reservoir. I should have left you there." The real Ruth's lips did not move. Reflected Ruth reached into her coat and drew a knife. Evelyn stepped away. The real Ruth looked hurt. "What did you see?" "Nothing. You saw me do something." "No, you don't trust me. I don't trust records. A reflection isn't a record. It is if someone remembers it." The mirror cracked from top to bottom. A hand pushed through from the other side. It wore Daniel's wedding ring. Ruth rushed toward it. Evelyn tackled her before she reached the glass. The hand closed on empty air, then extended impossibly far, its arm unfolding joint after joint. It caught Ruth's hair. Evelyn seized a film cabinet and drove it into the mirror. Glass collapsed outward, spilling black water across the floor. For a second, they saw Daniel submerged behind the wall. His eyes were open, both hands pressed against an invisible barrier. Ruth reached for him. Daniel shook his head. Behind him, Sela's Rook rose from the dark. Daniel mouthed one word. "Run." The water withdrew through the broken frame, taking every shard of glass with it. On the wall where the mirror had hung, someone had written a date in wet ink. October 17. Below it, a countdown had begun. 364 days. Chapter 11. OWEN Pike's daughter. June Pike had died 12 years earlier. Her daughter, Claire, still lived at the Terre Haute address. She opened the door with a chain engaged and recognized Ruth immediately. "You came to the funeral," Claire said. Ruth looked at Evelyn. "Whose funeral?" "My mother's. You stood across the street and watched us bury her." Ruth's face went pale. "I don't remember." "I do. Claire was 52, with close-cropped gray hair and the blunt manner of a person who had spent years being disbelieved. Her living room contained enlarged photographs pinned edge to edge across the walls. Every photograph showed a funeral. In each, Ruth stood somewhere in the background. Sometimes she looked her present age, sometimes decades younger. In one image dated 1964, 7 years before Ruth was born, she stood beneath a black umbrella beside an open grave. "That isn't me," Ruth whispered. "No," Claire said. "It's what uses people who keep watching." Evelyn showed her Owen Pike's file. Claire did not open it. "My grandfather's name was Owen. My mother spent her life trying to prove he existed. Owen was your father," Evelyn said carefully. Claire laughed once. "That is the newest version." She unlocked the chain and let them in. The identity had shifted through Claire's family for generations. In one version, Owen was June's brother. In another, her husband. In another, a son who died at birth. Every record contradicted the others. Only the photographs remained consistent. Owen Pike appeared near Daniel Vale's funeral long before 2011. Claire took down a tintype from 1886. A group stood outside the Blackwater courthouse. Town Registrar Silas Rook sat at a desk. Behind him was Owen Pike. The man had the same tired eyes and narrow mustache as the figure beneath the black umbrella. "This can't be the same person," Evelyn said. "It isn't," Claire replied. Owen Pike was never one person. It was the name Rook gave to bodies he couldn't identify. The phrase appeared repeatedly in Blackwater burial records. Owen Pike, unknown male. Owen Pike, APPROX, age 40. Owen Pike, found in river. It was not a man's name. It was a placeholder, a bureaucratic grave for the nameless. When Rook erased his son's death, Claire said, he needed somewhere to put the body. He called it Owen Pike. Every unidentified person afterward inherited the same name. The vacancy grew each time. Daniel buried one more body as himself, Evelyn said. He connected his name to the placeholder, and Rook learned how to travel through modern records. Ruth sat beneath the funeral photographs, trembling. "Why do I appear in all of these?" Claire studied her. "Because you aren't Ruth Vale anymore." Evelyn stepped between them. "Don't say that. Someone has to." Claire took a photograph dated 1948 and placed it on the table. Ruth stood at the edge of a grave, wearing a nurse's uniform. On the back was written "Witness Unknown." "Rook needs a registrar," Claire said. "Owen is the body. Ruth is the witness. Daniel is the identity. Evelyn is the certification." "What are you?" Evelyn asked. "The beneficiary." Claire lifted her shirt. Across her abdomen ran an autopsy incision, closed with black thread. "I died on October 17th, 1999, she said. "My husband identified the wrong body after a bus fire. I came home during my own wake. Ruth whispered, 'How are you alive?' I am not sure I am. Claire had spent 27 years tracing the identity through funeral photographs. She believed the register could not be destroyed because it was no longer a single object. Every institution holding a false record had become another page. Insurance companies, hospitals, tax offices, police departments, genealogy sites, even family albums reproduced the contradiction. To end it, she said, you don't destroy the record, you complete it. Name every unknown body, Evelyn said. Not every body, the first one. Rook's son had never been named in the Blackwater register. Sela's erased every mention, and the unnamed child became the original vacancy. Find the son's true name, restore his death, and Owen Pike would no longer be needed as a placeholder. Where is the name? Ruth asked. In someone who remembers him. He died in 1886. Memory doesn't always belong to the living. Claire pointed to the funeral photographs. The same child appeared in each one. Evelyn had overlooked him because he stood among different families, dressed for different decades. A boy of perhaps 9, pale-haired, holding a wooden horse. Sometimes he watched the coffin. Sometimes he watched the photographer. In the most recent image, Daniel Vale's funeral, he stood inside the open grave. We need to make him speak, Claire said. How? At a funeral where no one is dead. They prepared for a year. Evelyn could not return to her former life. Legally dead, she used cash from Heller's hidden emergency fund and slept in motels under names that changed weekly. Ruth remained with her, though her memory decayed in cycles. Some mornings she knew Daniel. Other mornings she believed herself to be Evelyn's mother. Once she woke speaking in Sela's Rook's flat, formal cadence, and wrote 6 pages of death entries before Evelyn stopped her. Claire built a catalog of the funeral photographs. Heller's negatives revealed the pale-haired boy in 32 of 34 cases. The 2 exceptions involved closed casket services with no photographs inside the chapel. They located descendants of the falsely identified bodies. Most refused contact. A few had spent years suspecting the truth. DNA testing, where possible, restored 6 identities. Public corrections were issued. Graves were renamed. Each correction changed the photographs. The corresponding dead figure vanished from Daniel's funeral crowd. Officer Lena Morris disappeared after her remains were returned to her family. Warren Cobb's drifter was identified as Frederick Cobb, no relation to Warren, through an old military dental chart. When his name was placed on the grave, the burned hand vanished from Cobb's cabin photograph, but Owen Pike remained. The placeholder contained too many dead. As October approached, Evelyn's face began appearing in obituaries across the Midwest. Funeral homes received bookings in her name. Florists delivered wreaths to abandoned buildings. Strangers recognized her on the street and offered condolences. On October 1, a child at a diner asked Ruth when Evelyn would be buried. On October 5, Detective Sloane found them. He entered their motel room alone, older and exhausted. He placed his badge on the table. "I have been looking for you for a year," he said. "You forgot me at the hospital," Evelyn replied. "I forgot you every morning. So I tattooed your name on my arm." He rolled up his sleeve. EVELYN cross is alive. Do not believe the certificate. Beneath it were 37 tally marks. Sloane had reopened her death investigation each time the records reset. He found the crematorium that processed the body under her name. DNA proved the remains belonged to an unidentified woman recovered from a river in 2008. Another vacancy. "We corrected the certificate," he said. "It changes back at 3:17 every morning." Evelyn showed him the plan. On October 17, they would hold a funeral for Evelyn Cross at the cemetery where Daniel Vale had been buried. The coffin would be empty. No false body. No substituted name. Every available witness connected to the corrected graves would attend. They would display the photographs and speak the restored names. The boy would appear because the records expected a death. Then they would ask him his name. Sloane read the plan twice. "You said questions are invitations." "They are. So when he answers, what enters?" Evelyn looked at the funeral program, already printed with her photograph. Something that has waited 140 years to be remembered. Chapter 12. The Empty Funeral. October 17. Arrived with rain. The cemetery had changed little in 15 years. The elm beyond the fence was dead, its branches black against the low sky. Daniel Vale's stone stood beside an unmarked grave that had once carried his name. After DNA testing confirmed Owen Pike was not one person, the cemetery removed the marker and left the earth bare. At 10 in the morning, an empty coffin rested beneath the awning. Evelyn watched from the funeral home's preparation room through a narrow window. Officially, she was the deceased. Her obituary reported a sudden illness. Her service was open to the public. 38 people attended. Relatives of Officer Morris, Frederick Cobb, and 5 other restored bodies sat together in the first rows. Detective Sloane stood near the cemetery gate. Claire Pike arranged Heller's photographs on easels. Ruth wore black and held Daniel's old overcoat folded across her arms. No one carried a camera, except the Polaroid Evelyn had used in the vault. At 10:47, the first stranger arrived. He signed the guest book as Marcus Bell. At 10:53, Warren Cobb walked through the gate. Though Evelyn had watched his cabin burn, Officer Morris came next in uniform, followed by Franklin Heller, Peters, and 7 people whose faces matched the missing investigators. They took seats at the back without speaking. The living mourners did not appear to see them. At 11, the minister began. Evelyn stepped from the funeral home. A murmur moved through the crowd. The minister stopped reading. Some guests recoiled. Others stared with the embarrassed anger people show when a performance breaks its rules. "My name is Evelyn Cross," she said. "I am not dead." The words felt dangerous in her mouth. Ruth flinched, but the cemetery remained still. Evelyn opened the coffin. It was empty. "This grave belongs to no one," she continued. "No body will be given another person's name today." Claire uncovered the first photograph. Officer Morris's sister stood and said, "Lena Marie Morris." The dead officer at the back vanished. Wind shook the awning. Frederick Cobb's grandson spoke next. Frederick Allen Cobb. Warren Cobb's burned vacancy disappeared, leaving the seat wet. Name by name, the witnesses corrected the dead. Each declaration altered the funeral photographs. Figures faded. Faces returned to bodies. The crowd of borrowed identities grew smaller. Rook responded through the records. The minister's book changed beneath his hands. He began reading Evelyn's death certificate instead of the service. The cemetery stones rotated their dates to October 17. Phones rang in every pocket, each displaying a call from the person holding it. No one answered. Rain fell harder. At the back row, Daniel Vale appeared. He wore the dark overcoat. His face was whole, but his mouth was the thin cut of Sela's Rook. Ruth saw him. "Daniel," she whispered. Evelyn caught her hand. "Wait." The last corrected name was spoken. Only 3 dead remained beneath the awning. Daniel, the burned man called Owen Pike, and the pale-haired boy holding a wooden horse. The boy stood inside the open coffin. He wore a dark wool coat and muddy boots. Water streamed from his hair, though he was sheltered from the rain. His eyes were old and furious. Claire raised the tintype from 1886. "Who are you?" she asked. The boy looked at Sela's Rook. Rook's borrowed face tightened. The boy said nothing. Evelyn stepped closer. "Your father erased you." Every headstone in the cemetery cracked. "He took your death away," she continued. "He took your name so he would not have to remember burying you." The boy's hands closed around the wooden horse. Rook spoke through Daniel. There was no son. The phrase echoed from the minister, the telephones, the funeral home speakers, and the mouths of every dead person in the back row. There was no son. Ruth unfolded Daniel's overcoat. A small object fell from the pocket and landed in the mud. The black button. Ruth stared at it, and memory returned like a physical blow. She gasped Daniel's name, then covered her mouth. Daniel's eyes flickered with recognition. Ruth picked up the button. Sewn beneath it, hidden in the folded fabric, was a scrap of old paper. Daniel had carried it for 15 years without understanding its purpose. Claire took the scrap. It was a school attendance slip from Blackwater, dated January 1886. One pupil had been marked absent for 6 days. Elias Rook. The boy in the coffin looked up. Rook screamed through Daniel's mouth. "That is not his name. Evelyn held the paper toward the child. Elias. The cemetery changed. For one instant, the modern stones vanished. Snow covered the ground. A small wooden church stood where the funeral home had been. Men carried a child's coffin toward an open grave, while Silas Rook watched from behind the elm. The boy whispered, Elias. The word passed through every witness. Claire said, Elias Rook. Ruth repeated it. Sloane repeated it. Then all the mourners spoke the name together. The empty coffin filled with black water. Silas Rook staggered. Daniel's face separated from the blank shape behind it, as if two photographs were being pulled apart. The burned figure called Owen Pike opened his coat. Inside his chest were hundreds of paper labels, each bearing unknown male. One by one, the labels became names. Some were spoken by witnesses. Others appeared only long enough to be known by the dead themselves. The crowd at the back dissolved into rain. Elias climbed from the coffin. Silas reached for him. The child recoiled. You buried me without my name. I saved you, Rook said. You saved the record. The boy touched Daniel's chest. Silas Rook was pulled out of him. He emerged as a tall column of paper, photographs, identification cards, and strips of human skin marked with names. No face, no body, only the shape institutions had agreed to recognize. The wind caught him. Documents tore free and spun above the cemetery. Birth records, payroll forms, insurance claims, obituaries. Each page blanked as it rose. Silas reached for Evelyn. His fingers were lines of black ink. You witnessed me, he said. I witnessed Elias. You certified the claim. I denied it. The denial is a record. He touched her forehead. Evelyn saw every version of her life he had created. Evelyn married to Daniel. Evelyn buried under her mother's name. Evelyn employed at Harrow in an office abandoned for years. Evelyn standing behind the fence at her own funeral. Each memory felt equally true. She nearly lost her name among them. Then Ruth pressed the black button into her hand. A thing was not only what records said. It was also what one person carried when no record remained. Evelyn closed her fingers around it. My name is Evelyn Cross, she said. Ruth remembers me. Ruth answered, I remember. Sloane said, I remember. Claire said, I remember. The living mourners repeated it. Silas Rook tore apart. The pages fell as white ash. Daniel collapsed beside the coffin. Ruth reached him first. He was breathing. His face was scarred, old, and entirely his own. Elias stood over them, still holding the wooden horse. The rain no longer touched him. Am I dead now? He asked. Evelyn knelt. Yes. The boy considered this. Then he smiled with relief. Behind him, the empty grave opened into darkness. The unnamed dead gathered at its edge, no longer burned or drowned, each wearing a face that belonged to one body. Elias took the first step down. others followed. Daniel tried to rise. Owen Pike remained. The man stood across the grave, tired eyes fixed on Daniel. "I know what I did," Daniel said. Owen did not answer. "I can't return the years." Owen held out one hand. Daniel looked at Ruth. She was crying, but she did not stop him. He took Owen's hand. For an instant, both men occupied the same shape. Daniel alive, Daniel dead, Owen named, Owen unknown. Then the image separated. Owen descended into the grave with the others. Daniel remained beside Ruth. The earth closed without a sound. At 11:17, the rain stopped. The funeral photograph developed in Claire's hand. It showed an empty coffin, living mourners, and no figure beneath the elm. For the first time, every person in the image had a name. Chapter 13, The Cost of Being RMMBRD. The official corrections took months. Evelyn Cross was declared alive by court order. Harrow Mutual restored her employment history, though the company insisted the 5th floor had never closed. Peter's desk remained beside hers, empty but dust-free. No one remembered Peter James Harlow, and Evelyn did not attempt to explain him. Ruth and Daniel returned to the farmhouse. The death certificates were amended. Owen Pike's remains, one set among many bearing that placeholder, were reinterred under a marker listing every verified name, and the words "for those still unknown." Daniel confessed to the substitution at South Quarry Road. Prosecutors struggled with a case whose records contradicted themselves. He accepted responsibility for abuse of a corpse, fraud, and obstruction. The prison sentence was shorter than he expected, partly because the body he had used could not be legally established as a single person. Ruth visited every week. She remembered him most days. Detective Sloan removed the tattoo from his arm, but left one line untouched. "Do not believe the certificate." Claire Pike attended no more funerals. Her autopsy scar faded until only a white line remained. One morning, she failed to wake. This time her daughter identified the body, stayed through the cremation, and carried the ashes home herself. The funeral photographs stopped changing. For 11 months, no dead Social Security number became active. On October 17, Evelyn tried to believe the claim was closed, but insurance work teaches that closure is a word, printed when an institution has decided the remaining uncertainty costs too much. On the anniversary, she arrived at Harrow before dawn. The special claims unit was silent. She checked Daniel Vale's number through every system available to her. Inactive. She checked Ruth's. Active. She called the farmhouse. Daniel answered on the first ring. "She's asleep," he said. "Wake her." A pause. "She isn't here. You just said she was asleep." "I thought she was." "Daniel, look at the photographs." Evelyn heard him moving through the house. A drawer opened. Glass struck the floor. "She is gone," he whispered. From the pictures. From all of them. Check your hand. What? Your wedding ring. He breathed sharply. I don't have one. The line filled with static. A woman began whispering beneath it. Not Ruth. Evelyn recognized her own voice. You closed the wrong claim, it said. The office printer started. A single page emerged. It was a new funeral photograph. The cemetery awning stood empty. The coffin lid was open. Inside lay Ruth Vale, hands folded over Daniel's black button. At the edge of the frame, beneath the dead elm, stood Evelyn. She held one finger to her lips. Across the bottom margin, a sentence appeared. A witness is also a door. The desk phone rang. The display showed Ruth Vale. Evelyn answered without speaking. A woman breathed on the line. Then Ruth said, It found your name again. The call ended. Evelyn sat alone beneath the fluorescent lights. Around her, computer monitors woke one by one. Each displayed a different database. Hospital admissions, tax filings, school records, police reports, funeral bookings, insurance claims. A search field waited on every screen. Letters appeared without a keyboard being touched. EVELYNCROSS. Thousands of results populated at once. Some belonged to her. Most did not. At 3:17, the office door opened behind her. She did not turn. A child placed a wooden horse on her desk. Elias Rook's voice whispered near her ear. He learned to use the living. Evelyn looked at the dark conference room glass. The reflection showed Silas Rook standing behind her, but he no longer wore an undertaker suit. He wore her face, her clothes, and her employee badge. In the reflection, he smiled. Then he walked out of the office, carrying her name. Ipialogiu.